Okay, students, we are on to the last section of chapter 11. I can't believe it. Hopefully you're doing good. This is the distance and midpoint formula. So you've touched on it a little bit. You have an idea and you have seen it. So here it just shows how the distance and midpoint formula is derived, basically from the Pythagorean theorem. Okay. So it's showing you're looking, if you know the distance of this and the y values, the distance of the x values, you take the absolute value of it, okay, because you remember distance always has to be positive, whether it's going to the left or to the right. When you talk about distance, you put the bars around, which mean absolute value. So that's how it's derived, all right? It's from the distance formula. So that's what they were showing. So you have the formula there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to write that down, make sure that you have it. So distance equals, because it's a little bit faded, square root, and then in parentheses, second x minus first x squared plus parentheses, second y minus first y squared. And then always do the line all the way to the end, because it means everything inside of here. So that's your formula, and you know you're allowed to use formulas on your quizzes and tests. Okay, so I'm going to work and I'm going to use some examples here, and I'm going to do one to find the distance between 2 points, okay? So if the distance is in a straight line, like vertically or horizontally, then you can just count a lot of times, unless it's a decimal. But like here, I was showing you, how are you going to find the distance between here and here? You can't just count. Here you can count. You could get this distance by counting. You can get this distance by counting, unless it's a decimal. If it's an integer, you can count. But you cannot do that on this. So this is why we need the distance formula, because there's no way to count this. All right? So let's go ahead and let me write the distance formula. Always do that on your work. Write whatever formula you're going to be using on the top, so you can just refer to it. It makes it easier and you don't mess it up. So one of the things is you have to be careful about not putting the incorrect x or y. So I was just label it. The first x, the first y. The second x, the second y. I almost put second x again. So first x, the first y, second x, second y. If you do that, then you won't have any issues. And also too, in the formula, because you're squaring it, that makes it always positive. When you square it, x will always be positive and y. If you get negative, you're not doing it right. So follow the way I'm doing it. Make sure that you put parentheses around and square it. And there is a minus in the formula. So if I have a minus, then I have a negative number. It's going to become a positive. So those are the little things that you have to be aware of. As long as you're careful about that, this is not a difficult lesson. Okay? Distance equals, so I'm just going to do my square root. So I'm going to start with the parentheses. The second x, so the second x here is 5, minus, because I already know the minus from the formula, so I do it straight away, the first x. So here we go. That's a -1. So minus a -1 is going to make it a +1 squared. So we're at the level now where I don't have to keep showing every little step. You should be able to do that now. Okay, parentheses, the second y, which is 2, minus the first y, which is 3. So squared. All right, you're going to see why squaring it will always need to be in that formula. It's like taking the absolute value. It ensures that you're going to end up with a positive. So the first one is 5 plus 1, which is 6 squared, and I always put the parentheses around, plus 2 minus 3 is going to be a -1 squared, and I always put the parentheses around because that ensures that it will become a positive. So distance equals 6 squared is 36, plus -1 squared is 1, So the distance is the square root of 37, which is fine. If they give you that on a multiple choice, then you can leave it like that. If not, then I'm going to go ahead and do the decimal. There's nothing wrong with practicing doing that. So second x squared, 37. I'm going to put the parentheses. And the decimal is approximately 6.1. Okay? So either way, you should be able to do both. I would keep it as a radical or put it as a decimal, just in case you have a multiple choice question that has it in either form you're comfortable. So that's how you're going to do that. So it's real easy. You just have to be careful with signs and make sure that when you square these numbers, they are positive. If you end up with a negative inside here, you've done something wrong. That's your big tip. So that's example 1. So example 2. So I'm going to do one of each type so you have something to look at when you're doing your homework. The next thing is find the distance between 3 and negative 5 and 7, b is 5 units, okay? So they want you to find the value of b. Okay, so remember, we're using this formula always. So we're getting up close to being off the page. Let me move it a little bit. Okay, move it over. There we go. All right. Okay, so what they've done is they've given you a first x and a first y, a second x, and the second y is the unknown. They're calling it b. But they want you now to find what the second y was. All right. So most of the time they're just asking you for the distance, but here they're going to give you the distance. They say is the same as equal. The distance is 5. So you've got to plug everything back into here. Okay, so now you work with knowing the distance is 5, so plug 5 in for D. Okay, and then go plug everything else in, and we're going to go ahead and solve it. So second x, that's given to us. 7 minus the first x is 3 squared, plus second y, that is the unknown, we're calling it b, minus the first y, minus the negative 5 makes it a plus 5 squared. Okay, so you've plugged into this formula. You know the distance. It's saying the distance between the two ordered pairs is a total of 5, but they want you to find that second y. So let's just go ahead and simplify. So 5 equals 7 minus 3 is 4. 4 squared is 16. I already know that. Plus, that's b plus 5 squared. So that means that you're going back to FOIL. See, you have to go back and remember all the skills that you've learned because it's going to use it. The further you get in the book, they're using everything. It could be something you learned in chapter 3 or chapter 5 or chapter 6. So you have to remember. So that becomes b times b is b squared. So we're FOILing. Okay. The first terms, the outside terms, b times the positive 5 is 5b. The inside terms, the I, 5 times b is 5b. And we always write the number before the variable. 5 times 5, the last, is 25. Okay, so I'm going to put this in here, b squared, but these two are the same. You know how to add like terms. 5b and 5b is 10b plus 25. Okay, so we have this. So now let's go ahead and simplify. Can't we add 16 and 25 together? We can. We're still, everything's inside the root, but let's put it in order. B squared plus 10b plus 25 and 16, add them together, that's going to give you 41. So see, bit by bit, you've simplified it and you've put the terms together. So now, what do I have to do? To find out what b is, looks like a quadratic here. But we've got to get rid of the square root. So you've learned already to get rid of the square root, you square this. That means I have to square that. So 5 squared is 25. And this means that you just left with what's inside, b squared plus 10b plus 41. Okay, so let me move this up a little bit. Okay, so here we go. So now it's definitely looking like a quadratic. So I'm going to go ahead and set it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 25 from here. So I've got 0 equals b squared plus 10b plus 41 minus 25, 35, that's 16. Okay, so now I should be able to factor it, and there must probably going to be, what, 2 solutions. So let's try factoring it. So this tells me same signs and they're both pluses, so I can fill that in. If I couldn't factor it, then I would use the quadratic formula or, yeah, some other way. So what are factors of 16 that can add together to give me 10? So I'm thinking 8 times 2 is 16, and 8 and 2 add up to give me 10. So I know that those work. So go ahead and set both of them equal to 0. That's one of the factors. That's the other. And you should know by now that if it's a plus, your answer is going to be -8 and -2. So you do have 2 solutions. Both of them will work. Okay? So you should be able to plug it in and check that. All right? So that's how you're going to do that kind of example, if you see that. The next one is the midpoint. The midpoint is like really easy. That is the distance. So let me go ahead and pull this down. That is the distance between 2 endpoints, basically. You're getting right the center of it. Okay, so the midpoint formula is, all right, midpoint formula, the midpoint of x is the first x plus the second x divided by 2. It's a real simple formula. The midpoint of y, see how I've done y and x to separate, is take the first y plus the second y divided by 2. Okay, so now we're going to plug some numbers. It says find the midpoint. So if I have a line here, here's an ordered pair of some kind, here's an ordered pair of some kind, and I'm wanting the center. That's the midpoint. So of course it makes sense that you're going to take the 2 endpoints, add them together and divide by 2 for the x's and for the y's, and that's how you're going to find it. So here we go, -1, -2, and 3, -4. So we're going to find the midpoint. So again, label it. First x, first y. Second x, that's the only time I see problems is people rush and they pick the wrong x or y for the problem. So label everything because they're super easy and it'd be silly to make a mistake on that. So I'm looking for the midpoint of x. So the midpoint of x is the first x, -1, plus, I'm following the formula, the second x, 3, divide it by 2. And the midpoint of y is the first y, -2, plus the second y, -4, divided by 2. So we're going to get an ordered pair. So 3 minus 1 is 2. 2 divided by 2, don't forget to divide, is 1. So that means the midpoint of x is 1. Now the midpoint of y is -2 plus -4 is -6 divided by 2, and that's going to give me -3. So that is my midpoint, okay? The center point between those 2 ordered pairs is 1, -3, okay? So the last type we're going to do is, because I've given you a couple of these on your homework, is where they give you an endpoint. So watch this, because I just have one example of each, of 1 and 2, and they give you a midpoint of -6 and 4, okay? So they want you are looking for the other endpoint, okay? Because normally you get 2 endpoints and you find the middle. Now it's the other way around. So you go back to this original formula. Midpoint of x equals first x plus second x over 2. Midpoint of y equals first y plus second y over 2. Always go back to the formulas they give you, and you should be able to. So this is the endpoint x. This is the endpoint of y. So you can call that y1, x1, y1. This is the midpoint. So I'm going to say midpoint of x, and this is the midpoint of y. Okay? So let's go ahead and try to find this other endpoint. So we know the midpoint of x here is -6. All right, so plug in -6. One of the endpoints is 1. So I'm going to plug it in here. Plus, I'm looking for the other endpoint. I just call it x. You can call it x with a little 2 if you want, but I'm solving. So I need to solve and find out what this is, and that will give me the x value for the other endpoint. So remember, it's like you have a line here. This is 1, 2. This is your endpoint. You have your middle point, -6 and 4. And we are looking for this x and y, the other endpoint, okay? So visually think about what you're doing. So I've plugged in my x for my midpoint, and I've plugged in one of the endpoints. Now I need to find this one. So that means multiply by 2. So -12 equals 1 plus x, subtract 1. And x is equal to -13. So I'm just going to write it down here, and I'll move it up here. So I know x is -13. All right, so I want to find y now. So I'm going to do the same thing. I have the midpoint of y, so sometimes it helps to draw it out if that helps you and you understand what you're looking. So the midpoint of y is 4, and the endpoint of y is 2. Plus, I'm looking for that other endpoint. So again, just multiply both sides by 2. Okay, that's 8 equals 2 plus y. Subtract 2. So y equals 8 minus 2, which is 6. So here we go. So that other endpoint was -13 and 6. And that's how you set everything up to find it. Whether they give it to you in a word problem or not, you're either looking for the distance of something, or you're looking for the midpoint, or they're giving you an endpoint and a midpoint, and they want the other endpoint. Just read your homework carefully, guys. Hopefully this helps. So here you can see everything, and the good thing is you can always scroll back and look. I would have my pen and paper out and be doing the examples as I'm doing them, because that will help you. You'll have them in your book, and that will help you when you look back. Okay? All right. God bless, guys.